He killed at least 5 people. Maybe more. Some believe the real number was closer to 37. He hunted couples in the dark. He called the police after murder scenes as if he wanted credit. He mailed blood-stained pieces of clothing to newspapers just to prove he was telling the truth. And then, he did something even more terrifying. He turned the killings into a game where the entire country became his audience. Imagine opening your morning newspaper and seeing a letter from a murderer who says he will keep killing unless his coded message is printed on the front page. Imagine realizing that the man writing those words is still free, still watching, maybe standing next to you in a grocery store, sitting behind you in traffic, or walking quietly through your neighborhood at night. For years, the Zodiac Killer taunted police, mocked investigators, and terrified millions of Americans. He claimed he was collecting slaves for the afterlife. He spoke in riddles. He hid messages inside cryptic ciphers. And despite one of the biggest manhunts in American history, nobody could stop him. No fingerprints ever solved the case. No DNA ever identified him with certainty. And more than half a century later, the Zodiac Killer remains one of the most infamous, unsolved murderers in history. Northern California, 1968. The late 1960s are often remembered as a time of peace, music, freedom, and rebellion. Young people filled the streets of San Francisco wearing flowers in their hair. Rock music echoed across California. The Vietnam War divided the nation while a new generation searched for meaning and change. But beneath that colorful image was another America. An America growing increasingly violent. Serial killings were becoming more common. Trust in law enforcement was falling. And in quiet areas outside the city, darkness hid things people did not want to imagine. The Zodiac Killer emerged from that darkness. The first known attack happened on December 20th, 1968, near Vallejo, California. The victims were 17-year-old David Faraday and 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen. They were young high school students on their first official date together. That night, the couple parked near a remote gravel road called Lake Herman Road. Teenagers often visited the area because it was isolated and quiet. It was the perfect place for privacy. But somebody else was there. Sometime after 11 p.m., another car pulled into the area. Investigators believed the driver approached the teenagers and ordered them out of the vehicle. David Faraday was shot point-blank in the head. Betty Lou Jensen tried to run for her life. She never made it. The killer shot her multiple times in the back as she fled through the darkness. When police arrived, they found Betty Lou's body lying several feet away from the car. David was dead beside the vehicle. There was no sign of robbery, no obvious motive, no witnesses who saw the killer clearly. The case quickly went cold. At the time, nobody knew this was only the beginning. 7 months later, on July 4th, 1969, another young couple drove to a secluded area. Darlene Ferrin was 22 years old. Michael Mageau was 19. They parked at Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo shortly before midnight. A car suddenly pulled up behind them. At first, Michael thought it might be a police officer because the vehicle shined bright lights into their car. But after a few moments, the car drove away. Then, it came back. A man stepped out holding a flashlight and a handgun. Without warning, he opened fire. Bullets tore through the car. Darlene Ferrin screamed. Michael Mageau was hit multiple times. The attacker briefly walked away, then returned after hearing movement inside the vehicle. And he fired again. Miraculously, Michael survived. Darlene did not. Less than an hour later, the Vallejo Police Department received a phone call. The voice on the line sounded calm, controlled, emotionless. The caller said he wanted to report a double murder. Then he added something chilling. He claimed responsibility not only for the Blue Rock Springs attack, but also for the murders on Lake Herman Road months earlier. Police traced the call to a payphone only blocks away from the station itself. The killer had been close. Very close. And now investigators knew they were hunting someone who wanted attention. 3 weeks later, newspapers across Northern California received nearly identical letters. Each envelope contained disturbing details about the murders that only the killer could know. But that was not the worst part. Inside each letter was 1/3 of a strange coded message. The writer demanded the newspapers publish the cipher on their front pages. If they refused, he threatened to kill again. At the bottom of one letter, the writer introduced himself with a symbol that would soon become infamous across America. A circle with a cross through it. The symbol of the Zodiac Killer. The ciphers triggered nationwide panic. Amateur codebreakers, teachers, military veterans, and cryptography experts all tried solving them. Finally, a schoolteacher and his wife managed to crack part of the message. What they discovered horrified everyone. The decoded text read, "I like killing people because it is so much fun." The message continued by claiming murder was more thrilling than hunting wild animals because man was the most dangerous animal of all. Then came another terrifying statement. The killer claimed he was collecting slaves for the afterlife. But one thing was missing. Police expected the cipher to reveal the killer's identity. It never did. In fact, the portion where he supposedly revealed his name appeared intentionally scrambled. It was as if the Zodiac wanted investigators to chase shadows forever. The media frenzy exploded. Television stations discussed the murders daily. Newspapers printed every new detail. Fear spread across California. Parents warned teenagers not to park in isolated areas. Young couples stopped going out at night. And somewhere out there, the Zodiac Killer watched the chaos he created. Then, on September 27, 1969, he attacked again. This time, the murders became even stranger. College students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were relaxing near Lake Berryessa, a peaceful recreational area surrounded by hills and water. It was a warm afternoon. Families and tourists were nearby. Nothing felt dangerous. Then they noticed a man approaching. He wore a bizarre black executioner-style hood covering his entire face. On his chest was the Zodiac symbol. He carried a handgun and spoke calmly. Brian later said the man claimed he was an escaped convict who needed money and a car to flee to Mexico, but the story quickly fell apart. The masked figure ordered the couple onto the ground and tied them up with pre-cut lengths of clothesline. Then, without warning, he pulled out a knife. What happened next was horrifying. The killer repeatedly stabbed both victims. Cecilia Shepard suffered multiple deep wounds. Brian Hartnell was stabbed again and again while lying helpless on the ground. After the attack, the Zodiac calmly walked back to Brian's car. Using a black marker, he wrote dates connected to previous murders on the vehicle door, ending with the words, "By knife." Then he drew the Zodiac symbol. It was like a signature, an announcement. A declaration that the same killer was responsible. A fisherman eventually discovered the victims. Cecilia Shepard was still alive when help arrived, but she died 2 days later in the hospital. Brian Hartnell survived and later gave investigators one of the best descriptions ever obtained of the Zodiac Killer. White male, heavyset, around 6 feet tall, dark hair, calm voice, but it still was not enough. The Zodiac disappeared again, then came the murder that changed everything. October 11, 1969. San Francisco taxi driver Paul Stein picked up a passenger near Union Square. The rider appeared ordinary, respectable even. Nothing about him seemed dangerous. Minutes later, the taxi stopped in an upscale neighborhood called Presidio Heights. Inside the cab, the passenger pulled out a handgun and shot Paul Stine in the head. But this murder was different from the others. The Zodiac was no longer targeting isolated couples in remote areas. This killing happened inside San Francisco itself, in a wealthy neighborhood, surrounded by homes. And the killer made a critical mistake. 3 teenagers watching from a nearby house saw part of the attack and called police immediately. They described the suspect as a white male adult wearing glasses. Officers flooded the area. Then came one of the greatest missed opportunities in criminal history. A patrol officer named Donald Folk later claimed he encountered a man matching the Zodiac's description, walking calmly near the crime scene. But because of a communication error, officers had initially been told to look for a black suspect instead of a white suspect. So the officer let the man go. Only later did investigators realize they may have stopped the Zodiac Killer face to face and allowed him to disappear into the night. The killer seemed amused by the mistake. Days later, newspapers received another letter from Zodiac containing a blood-stained piece of Paul Stine's shirt as proof he was the murderer. In the letter, he mocked the police for failing to catch him. The message terrified the public even more because it confirmed something deeply disturbing. The Zodiac was following media coverage closely. He knew what police were saying. He enjoyed humiliating them. And he seemed untouchable. Over the next several months, the Zodiac continued sending letters and ciphers. Some contained threats to bomb school buses. Others included bizarre diagrams and coded messages. One letter claimed he would shoot children as they exited buses. Panic spread through California schools. Some bus routes began traveling with police escorts. Parents feared sending their children to class. The Zodiac was no longer just a killer. He had become a psychological weapon. And the entire country was trapped inside his game. Investigators from multiple jurisdictions struggled to work together. Different counties controlled different crime scenes, and communication between departments was often slow and disorganized. Today, digital databases and instant communication help investigators share evidence quickly. But in the late 1960s, police relied heavily on paper files, phone calls, and physical evidence. That created problems. The Zodiac exploited those weaknesses brilliantly. Fingerprints recovered from Paul Stine's taxi became one of the most important pieces of evidence. Investigators believed the prints likely belonged to the killer, but matching them proved impossible. Police also collected handwriting samples from letters and envelopes. Experts compared the writing to thousands of suspects. Again, nothing definitive emerged. Then there were the ciphers. The Zodiac mailed multiple coded messages over the years. Some were solved partially. Others remained mysteries for decades. One cipher sent in 1969, known as the 340 cipher because it contained 340 characters, frustrated experts for more than 50 years. People became obsessed with cracking it. Some believed the code contained the Zodiac's name. Others thought it hid clues about future murders. Entire communities of amateur cryptographers dedicated years trying to solve it. Finally, in 2020, an international team of codebreakers cracked the message. But the result shocked many people because it contained no identity reveal at all. Instead, the cipher appeared to be another taunting message. The Zodiac mocked fears about the gas chamber and repeated his strange claims about slaves in the afterlife. Even after decades, he was still refusing to give investigators what they wanted most: his name. The investigation consumed enormous resources. Detectives chased countless leads. Some suspects confessed falsely for attention. Others were accused by neighbors, family members, or co-workers based on vague similarities. One of the biggest challenges was determining exactly how many murders the Zodiac committed. Police officially linked him to 5 murders and 2 attempted murders, but the Zodiac himself claimed responsibility for 37 killings. Was he lying to inflate his reputation, or were there additional victims nobody connected to him? That question still haunts investigators today. Some unsolved murders across California share similarities with Zodiac attacks. Young couples targeted in isolated areas, sudden gun violence, cryptic communications afterward. But proving connections remains extremely difficult. The deeper investigators looked, the more confusing the case became. And then there was the issue of motive. Why did the Zodiac kill? Money was not the goal. Sexual assault was absent from the confirmed crimes. The attacks seemed driven by something else entirely. Power, control, fear. Many experts believe the Zodiac enjoyed manipulating society more than the murders themselves. He craved publicity. He wanted newspapers to print his letters. He wanted police chasing him. He wanted ordinary people living in fear. Every headline fed his ego. Every unsolved cipher increased his legend. And the longer he avoided capture, the more powerful he felt. Over time, several suspects emerged as possible identities for the Zodiac Killer. Some investigators became convinced they had found the man responsible. Others strongly disagreed. The most famous suspect was Arthur Leigh Allen. Allen first attracted police attention in 1971 after one of his friends reported disturbing comments he allegedly made. According to the friend, Allen spoke about wanting to kill couples randomly, called himself Zodiac, and even mentioned using a flashlight attached to a gun, a detail connected to the Blue Rock Springs attack. Investigators quickly became interested. Arthur Leigh Allen lived near Vallejo and owned a Zodiac brand watch featuring a symbol similar to the killer's famous cross-circle emblem. He had also been fired from teaching after accusations of inappropriate behavior involving children. The deeper police looked, the stranger things became. During searches of Allen's property, investigators found weapons and suspicious materials. Handwriting experts examined his writing. Detectives compared fingerprints and later DNA evidence, but despite years of scrutiny, major problems remained. Allen's fingerprints reportedly did not match prints recovered from the crime scenes. Handwriting experts reached conflicting conclusions. DNA evidence was inconclusive. Even so, many detectives remained convinced he was the Zodiac. Why? Because the circumstantial evidence felt overwhelming. Allen allegedly owned the same type of boots connected to the Lake Berryessa attack. He was linked geographically to several crime scenes. Surviving victim Michael Mageau later identified Allen in a photo lineup, though critics questioned the reliability of the identification decades after the crime. Arthur Leigh Allen died in 1992. And with his death, many believed the best chance of solving the case disappeared forever. But he was far from the only suspect. Another major suspect was Lawrence Kane. Kane suffered a brain injury years before the Zodiac murders. Some investigators believe the injury may have altered his behavior and impulse control. He lived near areas connected to the crimes and reportedly possessed disturbing tendencies. Most importantly, surviving victim Kathleen Johns, a woman who claimed the Zodiac abducted her and her infant daughter in 1970, later identified Kane as the man who kidnapped her. John's story remains controversial. She claimed a stranger offered help after her car malfunctioned late at night. Instead of assisting her, the man allegedly drove her around for hours while threatening her life. She eventually escaped with her baby. Later, after seeing a police sketch of the Zodiac, she said the man looked exactly like her abductor. Some investigators believe the incident was genuinely connected to Zodiac. Others are unconvinced. Lawrence Kane died in 2010 without ever being charged. Then there was Rick Marshall, a projectionist and film enthusiast with an interest in cryptography and strange behavior patterns. Some believed his obsession with movies and codes aligned with the Zodiac's personality. Others pointed toward Richard Gaikowski, a journalist whose writing style allegedly resembled Zodiac Letters. And over the decades, countless other names surfaced. Teachers, military veterans, police officers, engineers, even respected community members. That uncertainty became part of what made the Zodiac case so terrifying. The killer could have been anyone: a quiet neighbor, a coworker, a man smiling politely at the grocery store. The theories surrounding the Zodiac Killer grew even stranger as years passed. Some people believe Zodiac stopped killing after nearly being caught in San Francisco. Others think he continued murdering under different identities. A few even argue there may have been more than one killer involved. Could multiple people have written the letters? Could copycats have confused the investigation? Some theorists suggest Zodiac had military training because of his weapons knowledge and use of codes. Others believe he worked in law enforcement or security due to his confidence around crime scenes and police procedures. Then there are the ciphers themselves. The Zodiac clearly wanted people studying them. He wanted attention focused on his intelligence. But experts still debate whether the ciphers actually contain meaningful hidden messages or whether some were intentionally designed to waste investigators' time. That possibility is deeply unsettling. Imagine spending decades trying to solve a code only to realize the killer created it purely to manipulate you. Even today, amateur detectives continue investigating the case online. Internet forums analyze handwriting samples, police reports, timelines, and old newspaper archives. Some people dedicate entire lives to identifying the Zodiac Killer. And every few years, a new claim appears. A retired detective says he found fresh evidence. A documentary points toward another suspect. A private group announces they solved the mystery. In 2021, an independent investigative team known as the Case Breakers claimed they had identified the Zodiac as a man named Gary Francis Post. The announcement gained enormous media attention. But law enforcement agencies did not officially confirm the claim. The FBI later clarified that the case remains unsolved. That response frustrated many people because it highlighted the same problem haunting the investigation for decades. No evidence has conclusively proven the identity of the Zodiac Killer beyond reasonable doubt. And after so many years, solving the case becomes increasingly difficult. Witnesses die. Memories fade. Evidence deteriorates. Potential suspects pass away. Still, investigators continue searching. Modern forensic science has revived hope in many cold cases. Now technology has solved murders once considered impossible to crack. The capture of the Golden State Killer proved that even decades-old cases can suddenly break open through genetic genealogy and advanced forensic analysis. Some experts believe the Zodiac case could eventually be solved the same way. But there is a problem. The available DNA evidence may be contaminated or incomplete. Investigators are not even fully certain whether DNA recovered from Zodiac Letters actually belongs to the killer himself. If someone else handled the envelopes or